So the way that we met was I found this book back in 2001 called How NASA Builds Teams, and I got stuck into it in December of that year, and I just absolutely loved it. It for me confirmed many things that I'd suspected about project management, but all kinds of things that I'd seen in organizations. And so I reached out to Charlie and said, Charlie, this is a cracking read. I'm really enjoying reading your book. To which Charlie responded, thank you, Paul. That's a nice 77th birthday present. So it just happened that we connected on around your 77th birthday, Charlie.
You know, I was thinking about this. The people that really enjoy this work are typically people who knew it already, knew these things already, and this just organized it better for them.
Yeah.
When I did when I used to do workshops, I learned to do a team development assessment before a workshop, and teams that scored high in that loved the workshop. I got scores like 9.7 or something like that. And teams in the bottom, I learned not to even deal with them because they don't learn anything. So I'm not surprised that you found a lot of kinship with this. That's really what lights people up.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's generous to say that it was stuff that I knew before, but because I think that it really describes that social context in a way that's very unique. I think it's essentially turning invisible things into
Yes.
ideas that you can work with.
You got it. That's the whole point.
Yeah. But it certainly resonated with me because I had a background in managing large projects, and I noticed that you could manage a project with an Excel spreadsheet or no spreadsheet, or you could manage it with the most complex project management system that you could lay your hands on. But none of those things really seemed to matter. It was always the people and the the context in which your project was happening that overrode absolutely everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and yet it's the one thing that no one is really taught to manage. You think about we were talking earlier about Sharpie and some of the work that he does with the Australian Institute of Project Management. All project managers are trained in process, but they're not fundamentally trained in context. So that remains invisible, and it remains probably the major risk.
It's really interests me how this is totally ignored by almost everybody. And it is the deal. So you're quite right. The first step is to be able to name something. So now there's a field there that now you can name it.
Yeah.
And the step that I think I took is measuring it and managing it.
Yeah. I think
that's supposed to be about your observations, not mine. Sorry.
I think these are always our conversations end up ranging far, Charlie. So yeah, I love the exchange. I think some organizations would probably call it culture, but the thing with that is that it's kind of useless because the term culture is so widely defined, right? And if you say
exactly
culture,
right.
it's got something else rattling in the head.
It's a rubber word. But by the way, there's Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, once said, "There's no science in social science," and there's certainly no vocabulary. In physics, we physicists can get together and talk, and we know exactly what we're talking about, even if they're from another country. But culture, I don't know what the hell it means. I have my own definition for it, but I don't. It has no universal meaning.
Yeah, and Charlie, the thing that immediately resonated with me about the 4D program is that the emphasis on behaviors. Because you might not agree on terms, and you might not be able to fully define various aspects of culture, but I think you can observe something like authentic appreciation. We can establish someone dealing with shared interests and working through those with a group. So I think the beauty of those things is that it takes away that reliance on, having to have a shared definition, because the behavior is observable.
And so when I first started this, it's kind of a first principles thing in physics. What are you trying to do? And it occurred to me, it's behavioral change. If you haven't done that, you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
And I went through a bazillion different so-called training programs that changed absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Yeah,
good.
I think we've definitely heard that, and not just from ourselves. We've had many leaders come on, particularly the public programs that we run now in Australia, and they've been on every leadership course that you can possibly imagine. We've even had leadership groups come on the program when they've just been on a leadership development, and they've said, it's chalk and cheese. It's completely different to anything that they've done before.
Nice.
And they can see how it cuts through some of those invisible elements, those intangibles of group performance.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me the other thing that maybe not as resounding as the behavioral focus, but one of the things that certainly has struck me about the program, particularly as I've used it more and more, Charlie, is just how well it actually corresponds with all the contemporary research around social neuroscience. So which, as you know, is a new discipline. It's only in the last few decades that they've been able to put electrodes on people's heads and run experiments. And what they've learned is that we have all these great theories about how people respond to things and how they think, but most of those are wrong, right? They just don't actually correspond with what people do in practice. And so, but the beauty of the 4D program, I think, is that it stands up to that, right? Although that's new science, it actually resounds and resonates with it incredibly well. So even relatively new concepts like psychological safety and why that's important in a team setting. That's Amy Edmondson only coined that phrase a little while ago. But if you look at the 4D program, it absolutely creates that. It's one of the finest step-by-step, behaviorally orientated ways of creating an environment where team members feel safe, where they feel appreciated, where there's shared interests, there's a sense of belonging, there's elements of appropriate inclusion, all of those kinds of things, dealing with the dramas. They make it a safe environment, and then you've got a basis for a really high performing team. So I think this does what a lot of programs I think would long to do, which is actually do something practical about that. Actually create an environment that's psychologically safe, and then go on to high performance as a result. So I think this all of that.
That's it. That's exactly. Yeah, nice.
The program is it's just so multifaceted. We've just found that it appeals to leaders at all levels. We quite often get individuals saying, is this and of course I should preface this just by saying that that our focus with Crazy Might Work is on leaders. So I know that you've applied it sometimes for leaders and probably most often with teams in your experience for specific reasons. But we've actually found that it does resonate well with leaders in Australia. And when they say to us, at what level does this work? The answer is it works at all levels, because it's fundamentally it's designed for human beings. It actually resonates with everything that we know about brain science and about how people actually think and respond in social settings. And so it doesn't really matter if you're the executive leadership team of Accenture or whether you're a frontline leader of an emergency services team. This is going to work. This will work in any social context where you're trying to bring a group together.
Well, one of our clients in Boulder was a bakery. Okay. And that's the biggest problem was that half of them didn't speak good English. So and they liked it. So yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, just to put a point on that, one of my best workshop clients was the machine shop at Jet Propulsion Lab. And these are guys who came into workshops smelling of machine oil. I
Yeah.
mean, they're guys that work on lathes and milling machines and the like. And they had to go to a little shared computer to do the online work. They didn't even have a computer, but they loved it. That's probably and by the way, these are just down to earth people, you know, these are special. There's no bull crap with view graphs. For them, the part matches or it doesn't, you know, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. You know, I think I think we do also find that the people that are down to earth really enjoy the program because they're able to immediately take it back to their organizations and apply it. And I think somewhat similar to what you've been doing with your online group, Charlie, the public program that we run here, we run once a week. We do one behavior a week and
Okay,
over
cool.
a
It's
2 hour
a
period.
public, it's a
Yeah.
public, I mean, how many people?
Look, there's normally probably around about 20 would be the typical
Okay,
number. The squad, which is like a special crimes unit, the commander of that unit in Australia. But we get, you know, everything through to executive leads, and then down to you know, middle management, frontline leaders. So it's an incredible array, and we've even had scholarship students on the program working in with that cohort.
cool,
Uh,
well,
Now we get them to do team-based stuff on online, and they just love it, you know. And that sort of language or experience barrier is no barrier, you know, because
yeah, yeah.
you're just getting to know one another as human beings and building those the team cohesion, those you know, those individual bonds, which incredibly powerful. So yeah, you know, I think that it would be hard to say who's this program. It would be easier to say who's this not for, because you'd be hard pressed to you know, find someone I think that wouldn't benefit from it in some way.
You know, a Texas high school bought a whole bunch of my books early on. And I get an email now and then from people that even I think some of my clients have done the personality work in elementary school, and the kids got it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you probably just have to pitch it slightly differently, but I think ultimately you're talking about behaviors that I think everyone can understand and access.
By the way, there was a big client of mine, that Safety and Mission Assurance at Jet Propulsion Lab. She was many workshops over the years. In fact, Safety and Mission Assurance at NASA was probably in the end, the biggest customer. Started out with flight projects, but they sort of got it, that they're in the risk management business, and if you don't manage social risk, you've missed a big piece. And I heard her make a little tape about this, and she said the 8 behaviors are just common sense. I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to do that. And I think that's what you're talking about. You look at this and say, it's just common sense.
Unfortunately, it's not that common, Charlie.
I know. So it's the wrong, common sense is not common, especially in business.
Yeah, and I think, you know, having a way to approach something that you instinctively you might know that this is incredibly important, and I think we were talking the other day about references to causes for project failure, and you know that those range from people saying the context is 60% to others saying it's 95%, depending on who you talk to. I think it's much closer to 95% in my opinion. You know, in terms when you think about the real underlying root causes for failure, I think and some of the sort of NASA inquiries into shuttle programs and things I have concluded similarly that that those social causes precede the equipment failure or human error.
I think it's everything. You know, if you don't deal with this, you might get lucky, but that's it. It's at your peril. I mean, early on, I was when the business was bigger, I had a whole lot of 4D providers, and they'd keep sending me examples from all over the world of social failures. And look at this, look at this, the pipeline explosion in Mexico. And I don't think I've ever found a major failure that wasn't at its core social. When the nuclear reactor exploded, I watched the early on review by TEPCO, the power company, and they said, oh, it was totally the fault of the earthquake. They said, no, no, we're mistaken. It's the fault of the tsunami. And I thought, no, it's social. And I waited. It took about 8 months, but the government put together a high-level group from Todai, Tokyo University. And I have friends there, and they put me in contact with the chairman of the failure review board. And I said, would you send me a summary of your findings? And he said, yeah, it was man-made and social.
Yeah.
It was insularity of Japanese people to foreign advisors who told them over and over and over, you cannot leave those backup generators down there by the seawall. And the storyline that the managers ran was, no, no, we know better. We're not doing that. We don't want to spend the money. And look what happened. It's
Yeah.
always the MAX. People ask me when the 737 MAX story came up to analyze that. It's the same thing. It's a fictitious storyline put out by the CEO. They could build an airplane with 15% better fuel efficiency 2 years faster with the 737, which is probably the worst airframe in the world to try and do this with. And same thing over and over. It's
Yeah, I think Charlie, the thing is what to do about it, right? But because once you know that and you acknowledge that the social environment is going to have a huge bearing on whether or not you succeed at whatever it is, then what do you do about that, right? And I think that's where the 4D program,
measure it.
yeah.
It's, you measure it. It's really so simple. I tell you.
The benchmark, particularly because we've been at this now since since we started talking in 2021. We've been at this a couple of years now in Australia. So we've got a few clients that have repeated the benchmark and been through that whole benchmarking process a few times, and they've seen significant improvements across all of the behaviors. Even the ones that started with really high scores have improved.
Nice.
So, so
Nice.
I think the measurement absolutely, and we've actually encouraged clients to include other measures, right? If they think that there's a particular measure that is a good reflection of in our case leadership or team performance. So if it's staff engagement or employee net
Yeah,
promoter
yeah,
score, whatever
sure.
it is, we said measure it. Just measure it, and when we redo the benchmark, we'll redo that measure as well.
I think the four basic elements are very fundamental.
Yeah.
The behaviors are not. They're carefully selected. They're good ones to measure. They're not the only ones you could measure to get the social context. The social context affects every single thing. You could measure 8 different things and still measure the social context.
Yeah, and Charlie, what we found is that those measures, even though they're not part of the kind of 4D program, we found that they improve as much as the others. So
They're all to me the 8 behaviors are like looking into a diamond through 8 facets. And if you change any one of them, you change them all. If you appreciate better, it's easier to include people. It's easier to talk about hard problems, on and on and on. So they're like 4 probes into a multiverse of things.
yeah, I think that's incredibly powerful. The other thing that we've noticed organizations starting to do is that they actually revisit the 8 behaviors at the start of a project. So actually building that into their project charter.
Perfect. Wow, great. Okay.
Instead of just,
Nice.
a typical project kickoff is a bunch of people getting together and talking about what the project deliverables are and some of
Right.
the kind of mechanical aspects of how they're going to run the project. You know, when are they going to escalate? What are those pathways? The risk register, who's going to maintain that? You know, just some of those really mechanical elements. And so, you know, just think about the power of it, including something like 4D, when you're setting up a project to go,
Yes.
how are we going to work together? You know, what are our ways of working? Forget about the watch for a moment. How are we actually going to interact with one another? You know, what's the social.
Oh, you're doing great stuff, my friend.
Well, you know, I think it's just about application of this program, Charlie. I think the more ways you find to apply it, the more powerful it is. You know, it's definitely in the doing as opposed to the knowing. So I think these are, you know, none of the behaviors are particularly rocket science. If you excuse the pun, Charlie.
That's right. That's fine.
You know, they're not hard to understand, but they're just hard to do. You know, the mastery is in the repetition and the making them.
Repetition, you know, I'll tell you that that's so powerful. I mean, everything that I attended all kinds of things. Every single one of them was a one-off. There was not anything that ever had repetition. And how do you make behaviors effective? You make them habits and you perfect them. How do you do that? You repeat them. There's no other way.
Yeah,
That's why singers practice. That's why musicians practice. That's why sports teams practice. It's not because they like to practice. That's how you make the behaviors powerful and habitual.
yeah.
So you're quite right. You got it, man.
We were talking earlier, you know, about why this program is so effective, and how I don't think it's any coincidence, Charlie, that it really aligns with the most contemporary thinking about human behavior, and some of that is that, you know, culture, for example, is basically the collective habits of a group.
All it is.
And even things like you know, capabilities, and that get talked a lot about in human resources. Those are largely habitual, right? That they learn behaviors that have become unconscious. That they're so deeply ingrained that people are not thinking about them.
Totally, totally, absolutely. Yeah, you
So
got it, man.
yeah, no. One of the things I, you know, love about this program is it actually does that over time, and we can see this now again in clients that have been doing it for a while, where they've started off having to really think about these things and diarize something to remind themselves to do the authentic appreciation. But once you've done that for a couple of months, that you know, you no longer need a diary entry to tell you that you need to ring
Nice. Yep, yep.
a team member and just thank them for the contribution of a day. So you know, really powerful, and it becomes kind of an instinct. You know, it becomes really deeply ingrained in the behavior.
You're there. I'm glad you're having this good success with it. That's nice.
Yeah,
And
no, we've got you know, particularly some of the government agencies that we're talking to, you know, are saying that it's been transformational for them. You know, and again, you know, these are organizations actually, as I think about the agencies, that they typically do this with intact teams. So it's not just
that's the most
leaders and their
powerful.
teams. Yeah.
Yes. You know, you had mentioned this before, but I started out with doing leadership and I discovered two problems. The first was I went for my first business, I went to project management. That's my background, project managers of space projects. I knew these guys. And at the time I had no book, no data, and I would ask them about leadership. And they would say to me, no, we don't care about leadership, we care about results. I'm not, nobody signs my report card on leadership. They sign it on, does my project get done? Does it meet the requirements? Is it done on cost and schedule? Does it succeed, not fail?
Mm.
Help me with that. And I said, okay, that's team building. So it is leadership, but the emphasis on team building is really sort of a marketing driven idea. The second problem is that I found that institutions have leadership programs, and they usually don't like mine because it works better. So HR is resistant. So yeah, but your comment earlier is quite correct. It does develop leaders at the same time. But the idea of the collective, and the fact that it's become more and more apparent. You can look at our politics and see this, the way we adopt leader storylines, and the group reinforces them. If you so leaders can say any kind of thing, and if people want to believe it, they'll choose to believe it, and then the group will believe it, and then if you don't go along with it, you'll be sanctioned by the group, if not the leader also. So this whole thing feeds together. So you've got to, I think you've got to, the most powerful thing you can do is deal with the collective, because people don't realize the extent to which the ideas in their head are not original to them. They come from the group. And this comes from the fact that our genus Homo has been around 2 million years. And our particular species is the last surviving species of Homo. And how did we evolutionarily succeed, for example, than Neanderthals, who were bigger and smarter? The answer is we're more social. And this was an advantage. We discovered a new arrow that archaeologists found. We found a better arrowhead. It transmitted around the tribes almost instantly. The most, not to get carried away here, but the most interesting thing to me is that the climate that we live in right now, the Holocene, was created 12,800 years ago when we were in an ice age and a comet hit. And within like 1,000 years, the whole world took up farming. Humans somehow communicated so rapidly, and the world, when you had to walk on foot to transfer information, and everybody started farming at the same time, meaning within 1,000 years.
Yes.
So this whole thing about how we have a collective mind and to deal with that, that's what the intact team. I'm glad you're emphasizing that.
Well, Charlie, as you know, one of the other areas that we work very extensively in is the whole area of innovation. And I'm actually just completing a PhD on breakthrough innovation, looking at the last 2,000 years of invention and breakthrough across humankind. And the one thing that comes out of that very clearly for me is that the idea of the solo inventor, the solo innovator that has it's an absolute myth, right? They're looking at millions of patents and breakthroughs throughout the course of recorded history. There are almost no examples that you can honestly say are solo or in nature. You're always either riding on the previous wave of inventions or a conversation that you had with someone, but the teams that are serially creative, that serially produce huge numbers of patents, serial breakthroughs, are all exactly that. They're all teams. So that there's no one individual that orchestrates that.
I was just someone sent me an article about Elon Musk, because he's made himself more controversial than ever with his political things now. And what it said was that Tesla, the Roadster, actually was a company built it, and Musk bought it. And this beautiful thing with the reusable rocket that returns, a company built a booster that did that long before SpaceX, called DCX, and just was largely ignored. So, yeah, I mean, the whole, you ask who's the innovator in chief, you asked me yesterday, I would have said Elon Musk is a good example. It looks more and more like he picked up the ideas from somebody who worked on them before. I mean, by the way, Apple did not invent the iPhone, that somebody else did. So innovation is an interesting one.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think collectively, I guess we're tainted by these stories. I don't know if they're even true, of Alexander Graham Bell sitting in his laboratory trying hundreds of filaments. He probably had grad students and TAs working for him. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think I'm just something you said earlier about us being social in nature. I think, and that being a reason for the propagation of the species, the success of being on the planet. I think there's an enormous amount of, and as you were just saying that, it just reminded me of some research that I saw a little while back, which in some ways kind of debunks, we're talking about these beautiful models. I think George Box famously said that all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah.
And so we have all these pristine psychological models. The one I was thinking of is Maslow's hierarchy, which is good for some things, but it's not a great representation of what actually happens socially, right, in a social setting. I was reminded of this one particular experiment, which I think was a huge watershed moment in psychology, where they did this setup. So they had someone come into a room, and this person believed that they were playing a computer game with two other human beings. So a simple game of throw and catch, and there were two other humans and them. And what happened was during the course of the game, the computer stopped throwing the ball to the human. And of course they had electrodes on this person's head, and they watched what happened in the brain when they stopped being included in that process. But at the same time, in a adjoining room, they had another person also hooked up to electrodes, so they're monitoring the brain activity. But they also had an electrode on this person's thigh, and they were basically slowly turning up the heat, so making them more and more physically uncomfortable, to the point where it was quite painful. And then they put these two MRI scans side by side, and they said, you know what, we cannot see a difference.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Look at the neural pathways that are lighting up for social pain. They're exactly the same as the pathways that carry physical pain. So it's not like a secondary, nice to have circuit that we're firing up here. We're actually firing up the one that gets the most attention, which is when you're in physical danger or physical pain. So exactly the same pathways are lighting up when we exclude you from an activity. And so it's not a second order or a third order.
No, I think that's right. And what's interesting to me about this is that people try and treat the two things the same way because they both feel similar. But the remedy to physical pain and emotional pain are completely different. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Social pain is not remedied by repressing it. But and I'm sure you're probably there with rugby, the same thing in American football. When somebody can continue to play through enormous pain, it's considered a celebratory thing. Look what he's done. He's continued, he's got two broken fingers and he's still passing the ball. Isn't that great, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
But so it's we're taught, as particularly as men, to repress and ignore physical pain. That is not the right way to handle emotional pain. It does not, as Covey put it once, the feelings that are buried alive stay alive. So it's an interesting conclusion we make, that because they both hit the same part of the brain the same way, they're not best treated the same way.
Yeah, they actually did a kind of a funny follow-up to that experiment, Charlie, which is they gave both parties Tylenol, and they actually found that the person that was excluded actually felt a bit better having taken the Tylenol. To your point, we're not prescribing that to anyone listening.
Short term, but long term is not the best way.
Yeah, no, that's right.
So, of course, I do mention Maslow's hierarchy, but the way that I think about it, I had thought about the sequence, the most powerful sequence to make a request. And it occurred to me a long time ago that if you start with authentic appreciation, that opens up things. That's an opening move. And if all you do it authentically, that can never go wrong. So that's the first thing you should do. And then it seemed to me that the inclusion, which I would rank second, but I think it's contextual. Inclusion, as you pointed out, can actually be a bigger need than need for appreciation. And as you know, people who feel excluded the expression in the US is go postal. They act it out, okay? So those two, I'm not sure, but I think if you can address a shared interest, and then from there, it doesn't matter how you do it, but I was liking the idea that Maslow's hierarchy, and by the way, I don't think there's any general agreement about the details of it, But the idea that we have things that have to be met in order, for example, nobody would argue that there's the rule of threes, right? The physiological underpinnings of Maslow's work. First is air. You need air on a scale of 3 minutes. You need food and water on a scale of maybe for 3 days. Sleep on the scale of no, sleep. I'm sorry, sleep and water on a scale of 3 days. Food on a scale of maybe 3 weeks. So then you get into. I actually think the next one up is feeling safe, and that involves trustworthiness, and that kind of wraps up appreciation, inclusion, a whole bunch of 4D stuff. Then you get into the appreciation, but I don't take it literally, but I always like the idea that I can sort of reference something that people are more familiar with and kind of tie it together in another way. That's called unification in physics. That's what people are trying to do with string theory these days, is to unify physics. Or at least, so anyway.
Well, Tony, when I was thinking about this, so I know one of the neuroscientists on that experiment was someone called Lieberman, but again, it was a team. But but I got to thinking about why would that be? Why would not belonging generate a pain response that is so dramatic, in the brain? Why would it be given that priority pathway? And then something you said earlier about Neanderthals versus our current species. Why would something that's bigger and stronger not survive? Be much more prolific on the planet. And I think the answer comes back to, imagine going back 150, 200,000 years and actually being in
That's about the right time scale. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go back to that time and you think, well, if you got excluded from the group this afternoon and you had to spend the night on your own out in the African savannah, your chances would be, 0 to nothing of making it through to the morning, because they're much bigger predators.
Yeah, it's absolutely fatal. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when you think about it in that kind of original, the context in which our brain was wired, is not the current social.
Exactly. Yeah. So, early on, I tried to ask myself, what is it you can actually do by yourself? Okay. And so the first thing that came to my mind was, I knew people, if you're doing physics research, and you're, say, a theoretician, these people appear to be sort of working alone. Now it turns out they have graduate students and whatnot, but I thought that's a field you can pretty much isolate. Then I started to think, no, you've got to have grants, you've got to get things peer reviewed, you've got to have relationships with sponsors. There's nothing there's nothing you do by yourself, nothing. And in today's world, the necessity of interconnectedness seems to me it's expanding exponentially. If you're going to build a space shuttle, think of the number of relationships involved in that. It's gargantuan. Or even run a country. Our whole history is leaders who we knew personally, groups of 50 people. I actually saw a sign in Portugal from the Stone Age, written in stone, and it was interpreted to read, "There's some pretty ladies in the next village. You ought to go over and have sex with them, because our little village, only 40 people, we got a gene problem." So it's the basic notion of collective behavior is just it is. I think it's Homo sapiens' primary evolutionary advantage, is the collective behavior on a scale of 50 people or something.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned earlier Graham Alexander Bell, and some of the work that he did. But one of the evolutions of that was Bell Laboratories, and a very clever guy called Dunbar did some observational research on these kind of creative hotspots that we have around the world, and through time, where for some reason they're just able to produce a prolific number of, whether it's patents or scientific discoveries in various areas. And what he noticed was that those breakthroughs actually didn't happen when scientists were on their own in the laboratory. When they happened was when they got together in a group setting to talk about their science and the progress.
That's absolutely right. Somebody asked me recently, what did I think was the greatest invention of the last century? And I think they were gonna expected me to say, Hubble telescope or something. No, I said, I think it was the transistor. And I said, to think how the transistor has changed life. As a kid, we had things with vacuum tubes, and they're failing all the time. It was sort of an every other week event to go with my father with the vacuum tubes down to the drugstore and plug them in and see which were bad and get new ones and bring them back. So after I told him that, I thought I better look. I thought William Shockley invented the transistor at Bell Labs. I better look a little deeper, and I found out, oh, there's no agreement on that. Maybe 3 people involved. Well, maybe there were 8. So just like you're saying, we tend to name a person, but there are people who disagree that he's even the number 1 person. And I think collectively, this is how we advance collectively. I mean, you're absolutely, that's why I think the team social context is the highest leverage place to go. It's where we do our thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that 4D does brilliantly, Charlie, is it really distributes leadership. That it actually takes it out of this kind of mythical place where only one person can do it and everyone else stands by and goes, "Wow, what a great job you just did as a leader." I guess one really noticeable example for us is in that behavior around kept agreements. One of the ways that we apply that here is we talk about team standards. So the group have a discussion about, what are the things we will not walk by? What is our kind of minimum requirement, and then what's our aspirational thing? That we would, and then what you find is that that team hold each other to account. So no longer requires a sort of a leader policeman to go through and go, "Oh, you didn't do it the way that we're supposed to be doing it," because the whole team take responsibility for that. That they all have that accountability for maintaining the standards.
Beautiful. Yep, that's it. You got it. That's it. That's it. No, I think there's a bigger thing in social context, and that is that it's developmentally healthy. I mean, it's not just that you're going to have a successful business. You're going to have a business that's going to make you grow and live in a good way. In the social context, I actually recently changed some workshop slides and said, if you allow a red in my scoring system, social context to persist, you need to ask yourself what you're doing to the people that are in it. You're ruining them. And my favorite simple example is that when I was a young man, I was supposed to go to graduate school, and I got hired, an invitation to be hired by NASA instead. And there was a way that I could likely go to graduate school, but it wouldn't be the conventional way. And I thought, I want to be part of Apollo. I want to be part of that social context. And sure enough, when I showed up there, what I found was the storyline that we all ran was, we're going to the moon. We broke rules everywhere. We're going to the moon, get out of the way. If you got a problem, call the president. And I didn't even have a time card. Somebody filled it out. It just worked. And today it's just, so social context, it's developmental.
Yeah. I think that that commitment to a shared interest like that, is so compelling. I saw some research by Teresa Beale recently. I think she's attached to Harvard University from memory, but she noticed that that really high performers actually become much more engaged if you tell them that something's impossible. So if you say this,
that's interesting. Yeah.
Whereas most people go, "Oh, well," and then they sort of move along. But the high performers actually get intrigued by that. They actually go, "Well, let's see if it can't be done."
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I disobeyed my big bosses and started the Hubble servicing mission, the technical people said the fix is impossible. And that was the context in which I said, I don't believe it. It can't be impossible. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, by the way, when I realized that error was not a random error in the mirror, but a systematic error. I'm not an optics expert, and I would never figure out the way they figured out to fix it. But I said, there's got to be a way to deal with that. If it's a systematic error, there's got to be a way to put a corrective optic somewhere. And sure enough, there was. But when we started, we'd had like 2 weeks of really smart people, 24/7, and they said there's no fix. It's impossible.
Mm.
And I think you're right, that probably energized me even more. And I think the fact that I was told not to do it, one of my friends said, oh, that's because you're adverse to authority. I said, that has nothing to do with it. That's not true at all. Most of my life has been involved with the military one way or the other. I'm very comfortable with authority. It's just that it wasn't the right thing to do. That was the bigger issue.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll talk more than I wanted to on this. It inspired me to comment. Thank you.
Well, I think again, just the beauty of this program that you've designed, Charlie, is that I think everyone can relate to it, right? And to be frank, not everyone can tell stories the way that you do, or talk science the way that you do, but that's no limitation, right? Because all of these things are so universally relevant that there's going to be an ongoing.
So I encourage people to they're going to do workshops, tell your own stories. Like my friend Frank Martin, I asked him, what does he talk about 100% commitment? He describes working at Lockheed Martin and having his wife's daughter had a child with Downs, and like instantly decided to quit the job, move to North Carolina, and support her with that child. And that's the kind of thing that anyone can do things like this. Let me tell you another sort of recent thought about this. I'm realizing more and more that a lot of what I would call 100% commitment comes after a long simmer. The people have I recently tried to get a friend of mine to sell his house about 1.5 years ago and move to another part of Canada because he was basically out of work because of COVID, and he had a mortgage and he had a house that had gone up dramatically in price in the part of Canada he was living in because the Chinese were immigrating. And the place he and his wife were originally from, which I've been to those parts of Canada, you could buy a really nice house for 1/4 as much money. And I said, you got to sell this house and move, get out of debt, because how long the COVID's going to affect the ability to sell training, I don't know. And so it took him about 8 months. He had another precipitating event. And what happened was that probably true in Australia, in Canada, just like England, house mortgages get renegotiated every 5 years. They don't have a 30-year mortgage like we do here. Mm-hmm. So his mortgage got renegotiated. He decided in 5 minutes we're moving. But I think what happens is you have this long simmer, this slow burn of sort of worry, and then you get this tipping point. And once you hit there, you're off to the races. So I think for me, what helped in the Hubble story, and I tell us because people seem to like it, is all of the horrible criticism in the aftermath of this thing. I mean, I could not watch late night television or anything. We're being blasted everywhere, every newspaper, even internationally. So I think that simmer of all that distress, and none of us were used to this kind of level of attack, public attack, and being accused of incompetent, and on and on and on. It was only about 3 or 4 weeks of simmer, but I think when I got that stuff from Mikulski, that was kind of like the last straw, the boom. So I think that's how this works operationally. It has a simmer.
Yeah, I think there's some nice parallels there, Charlie, with what we see in the innovation space as well. They talk about something called incubation, which is
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I think the average age of a Nobel laureate is 60 years. So I think there's a fair bit of simmering that's been going on there, for many of them in terms of just trying to deal with an intractable problem, something that they've been working at from a number of
Well,
different.
I think you're gonna find that for most, I'm not sure about this thing, for most of them, what they did was 20 years earlier. And my friends who have Nobel Prizes, they all have big, broad, beautiful track records of accomplishment in these fields in addition. So it looks like the common perception is they did this and they got the prize. No, they were considered amazing contributors for their lifetime. And people kind of said, oh, this is a good reason to give them a prize. So I think, in physics, there's a saying we say to each other, if you haven't made your contribution by 30, you're never going to. And Einstein wrote his two seminal papers when he was in his early 20s and wrote something that those were special relativity and photoelectric effect. He got his Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, something probably you've never heard of, but I'm sure you've heard of relativity theory. Everybody has. But that's not what the prize was for. So I think they looked for something he had done and said, okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So he got the prize for that. And then he wrote another paper on general relativity that was the first explanation of how gravity works. That was, the first one was 1905, that was 1915. I'm not aware of anything he did great ever after. Now he may have done some things that specialists appreciated, but things that caught even casual physicists as remarkable. No.
Yeah.
So I think the simmer might be a little shorter for that kind of thing.
But it's that's also true of the 40 system, isn't it, Charlie? Because I remember
Absolutely.
previous conversations that we've had where you've said that I mean obviously I don't know the exact timing of your teaching at Colorado versus your time at NASA, but I think my perception was at least that you may have had a couple of aha moments in there, like the idea that you could represent social context in a matrix sort of 4x4.
Oh, yeah, that for sure. That was at the University of Colorado. I was at the time, the thing that I was focused on was stupid. It was books on leadership, and the reason is I was reading them, and the book Seven Habits by Covey. I happened to accidentally come across. I was a co-op student. I worked in a Navy laboratory when I was an undergraduate. I happened to be at an event in Washington and happened to, by whatever reason, meet one of my bosses back from those early days when I was still a high school, when I was an early college student. He said, "This is a book you ought to read." So I read the book, and the book really spoke to me. So I thought these books are useful. So the first class that I taught, I organized it with an acronym, and people liked it, but I wasn't happy with it. I could have named it the best of every training I ever had in my career at NASA. Would be a better, more honest title than what it was.
Yeah.
So I thought I started reading these books and realized they're all lists. And I thought there must be some integral connection between these ideas. These people must somehow have tapped into some master idea. Like in physics, that's what we're always looking for, is this core organizing principle, F equals ma, or Maxwell's equations, or whatever. Must be there. So I actually took a month off. I wasn't working in the summers because I'm just teaching. So and so I went and got the 5 or 6 most popular books, and I took the things to do and put them on the office wall. And I tried to find some unifying feature between them. I used supporting systems in physics, and looking for because I hate lists. I like things that are logical and have structure, and they're predictive when you have structure. That's what laws of physics are all about. They're about predicting things. You can tell when you throw a ball where it's going to go, for example, this kind of thing. And of course, more advanced things than that. But it failed completely. And the day I just said, I don't know why this is, I gave up. Next morning, I opened the newspaper and there was a Dilbert cartoon. He said, every consultant makes living with a 2x2 matrix. And I said, I made it too hard. It's an XY system. I happened to be reading Jung's work on psychological personality development at the time. And I thought, well, how about if I put that into a 2D XY system? And that's how it all started. And began playing with that and found out, yes, it's a really helpful tool. You can take these invisible fields. The same thing you do with equations in physics, you can reduce them into things that you can manage and understand. You can define personalities. You can, I actually worked for 7 years and made quite a good living out of helping companies win procurement competitions by matching up their mindset, culture, whatever you want to call it, with the customers. And that little tool did it. So that's the whole thing. That's how it happened. Dumb luck. Maybe a lot of things happen like that. For me.
Well, you got me thinking, Charlie. I think we probably need a separate conversation about my PhD. You just made me realize that's a list. So now I got my work cut out for me. But I think that that system definitely is a great way of approximating the reality. I think that obviously George Box would say no model.
That's all physics ever does. The same thing. It approximates reality.
Yeah.
The question is the real question about a physics equation or engineering, the same thing, is it predictive? Can you use it? You can build it on historical information. If you use it for something else, will it tell you what's going to happen? That's the whole idea of physics equations. By the way, you can never prove a theory in physics. All you can do is fail to disprove it so many times that you trust it.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the same thing. I can never prove this works, but I can show you it works in so many different ways that all involve social matters that you can learn to trust it. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's also true of the 4D system, Charlie. And I'm thinking about the multiple different ways that we use something like, for example, that context shifting worksheet, that you developed, and we find that we actually use that for accreditation. So something again, maybe
nice, great, yeah.
A little different, with our programs, we actually get each person has to submit to us, and it's completely confidential. But they have to submit a context shifting worksheet, which shows us that they can apply all behaviors to a social context.
That's a great final exam.
Yeah,
that's it. Perfect. Oh, you're a genius. I've never heard of anybody else mentioning that, but that's exactly it. That you've driven the car around the whole track. Yep.
But the amazing thing about that is that some of those assignments that come back have nothing to do with work, right? We've seen people apply the context shifting worksheet to working with their teenage daughter, working through some of the behavioral challenges that they're having there. Almost anything that you can imagine, coaching a rugby team.
That's right.
It's
so I did a lot of these public workshops in China. For 10 years, I was over there twice a year for a month at a time. And so the intact team stuff, which I did for intact teams, right? In that case, the way that came about was they said to me, we don't want a generic workshop. We want one that solves one of our problems. So the context shifting worksheet flew into that. So I'm thinking about these public groups, and the thing that got so much energy is this one. I cannot motivate or communicate with children. And most of the people in the room have children, but the ones that don't have exposure to children. They have aunts and uncles or whatever, brothers and sisters with children. And people say the damnedest things in these things. But in case of China, they're more outward going than Westerners tend to be, and then they would get up and say things, and I'd go, "Oh my God, you serious?" That's probably true in the West, just people won't say it. But that had lots of energy, and who's ever had children that doesn't have that problem,
Yeah.
you know? And what's fascinating is the thing that they think of last is the thing that's most important, and that's appreciation.
Yeah.
It's hardly on the radar screen until we do the work.
Yeah.
They're so consumed with the child's performance in school and this kind of thing. I said, you forgot to love the kid, and that's what he really needs.
And Tony, the other place where that I found that really works, and this kind of intrigued me because I noticed in your programs when you talk about using the 4 dimensions as a way of communicating,
Yeah.
that great speech by Gandhi, which does exactly that.
Yeah, right, it's perfect. That's right. He like read the book.
But the crazy thing about that, right, is if you go back to any great speech that you've ever heard, whether it's Obama or Kennedy or Malala, you name it, you can see that pattern over and over again. You can never unsee it once you've seen it, right? Because that's exactly what makes those speeches great.
In the early, the U.S. politics before recent days were not so, I don't know, dramatic. But the speech I always watched was State of the Union speech, because what the president used to do was to lay out his budget priorities and his priorities for the country. That's what the speech was about. And that interested me because I was a civil servant and worked for the government. And you're right, in the early days, I'd take those speeches and I'd take little tick marks on a paper and which dimensions he in. I said, you're doing the 4D process. You're appreciating, including, visioning, and finally you're taking action. I said, you're right. I think for those speech writers, it's intuitive. They don't think about the structure.
Yeah.
People do this as a profession. They probably simply look at what worked in recent speeches, and the way they do the inclusion is interesting. They always have the fireman on the stage with them, or the pregnant woman, or whatever it's about, and they actually physically include them in the speech.
Yeah.
So, but it is 4D orchestrated every time. You're right, and you can't unsee it. That's also true.
Yeah.
Say there they are. They're starting off with appreciation, and I mentioned this in the workshops, but I had a big hit from Bill Clinton, because I'm watching him, and he's talking to the Republican Congress, and they've just impeached him. So I thought, I want to see what he's going to do for this. And what he did was very clever and a good lesson. He couldn't authentically appreciate them, but he could appreciate the situations they're working with. So I want to really appreciate the fact that we're working together to solve Social Security. I want to appreciate the fact that we're joining hands and doing this. So that's how he did it. So if you can't appreciate the person, and I can't when I'm pissed off at him, you can always appreciate the situation you're in.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. Yeah, I think probably of all of the the elements of the program, that 4D structure, because it's kind of a shorthand for the 8 behaviors, but I've just found that invaluable. Anytime I'm put on the spot to do a presentation or respond to something with a group, you can do a lot worse than working your way through the 4 dimensions.
Nice, great.
With the group, just a
Great.
great way to kind of draw them in and allow people to feel appreciated and included as a starting point. And I think is it's a wise way of
You never go wrong. Authentic appreciation never goes wrong. And making this a habit, how much does this change your personal life?
Yeah, 100%.
I'm just realizing we've talked for an hour.
We were creating the longest YouTube recording of all.
I think so. And it felt like about 10 minutes, but I looked at the clock and it's 5:10. So I want to be mindful of your time, and let's, I think we should wrap up. Do you have any closing remarks you want to make?
Look, I would just say, my experience of you is that, your credibility and generosity epitomized. I think if it wasn't for the interactions I've had with you over the last few years, we wouldn't have, the wonderful program that we've got in Australia.
Thank you.
Changing lives, and that's in healthcare and law enforcement and all of these places, without the guidance and the way that you brought it to life for me and modeled it as well, I have to say. So yeah, thank you so much, Charlie. Really, have loved all our long conversations.
You've been an inspiration to me too, Paul. Really, I really appreciate you. You've got a wonderfully keen mind. It's great. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlie. And look forward to. I'm going to have to come back to you on my PhD now. So
yeah, right. Is that going to wrap up soon?
I hope so. But now that I've realized it's a list, maybe not.
If you can find an organizing principle in it, it's always better.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Good chatting with you.
Thank you.